Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It really helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I cut through Greenlawn Cemetery because it was faster. 10 minutes mattered to me then. I was tired, my legs sore from work, my phone battery low, and the neighborhood streets felt longer at night. The cemetery had wide paths and fewer turns. I had walked it enough times to know where the gravel thinned and where the ground dipped. It was late, 11:47 p.m., cold in that dry October way where the air feels sharp in your lungs. The sky was clear, no clouds, just a flat black stretch with a weak moon that didn't give much light. The lamps along the main drive were spaced far apart, leaving long sections of darkness between them. I remember the smell first. Old grass, dust, and something metallic from the sprinklers that had run earlier. My shoes made a steady sound on the path, gravel popping and shifting with every step. I was thinking about nothing important. Just getting home. Just heat, food, sleep. My jacket wasn't thick enough, and I kept pulling it tighter as I walked. Section D was quieter than the rest, farther from the street. Fewer lights reached there. The headstones were older, darker, some leaning slightly, some with pictures faded by the sun. I slowed down without realizing it, the way you do when the dark gets heavier. That was when I heard gravel crunch behind me. It was a single sound at first, then another, spaced like footsteps matching mine. I stopped walking. The sound stopped too. That alone made my skin tighten. Cemeteries are not silent places, even at night. You hear wind, leaves, distant cars, sometimes animals. This was different. This was close, deliberate, and tied to my movement. I stood still long enough that my calves started to ache. I listened hard. Nothing. No breathing, no shifting weight, no wind through grass. The quiet felt pressed up against my ears. I turned around slowly, not wanting to trip, not wanting to look scared, even though no one should have been there. Between two rows of headstones, I saw a man standing still. He was maybe 30 feet away. He was dressed dark, jeans and a jacket, clothes that didn't reflect light. His hands were at his sides. I didn't see a phone glow, no flashlight beam, nothing that explained how he was standing there so comfortably in the dark. His face was pale under the moon, features sharp enough to catch light. He didn't move when I turned. He just watched. His eyes stayed on me, unblinking as far as I could tell. I noticed small details that stuck with me later. His hair was neatly cut, not messy. His jacket looked clean. His posture was relaxed, like he had all the time in the world. That calm made my stomach drop more than anything else. I took a step back without meaning to. The gravel shifted under my heel. The man smiled. It wasn't wide or exaggerated. It was quick and controlled, like something practiced. He stepped forward. That was when my brain froze on something that didn't line up. His body moved closer, but there was no matching sound. I looked down without wanting to. The path dipped there, uneven from age and use. The moonlight hit his legs at a strange angle. For a split second, it looked like his shoes weren't touching the ground. Not floating, not rising, just not lining up right with the surface. Like my eyes couldn't place him correctly in space. Fear doesn't always come as panic. Sometimes it's a cold certainty that something is wrong, and you need distance from it immediately. My chest tightened, and I turned and ran. I didn't run straight. I zigzagged between headstones, my breath loud in my ears, my foot slipping once on loose gravel. My shoulder brushed against stone, cold and damp. I expected to hear footsteps behind me at any second. I expected the crunch to start again, faster this time. It didn't. That almost made it worse. I burst out onto the main drive, and didn't stop until I reached the gate. My lungs burned. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to brace them on the metal bars. When I finally looked back, the path behind me was empty. The shadows were long and flat. No movement. No sound. Just the normal night noises creeping back and like they'd been waiting. I didn't cut through the cemetery after that. I added 10 minutes to my walk and told myself it was smarter. Weeks went by, then months. I tried to forget the man's face, but it stayed clear in my head. The angle of his jaw. The way he smiled. The calm. Curiosity has a way of growing when fear fades. One morning, with the sun out and people around, I went back. It felt different in daylight. Harmless even. Green lawns, birds, distant traffic. Section D looked smaller than I remembered. Less threatening. I walked the same path, found the dip in the ground where my eyes had played that trick on me. In the light, it was obvious how shadows could hide contact with the ground there. How a person stepping forward could look wrong for a moment if you were already scared. I kept going. Row 14 was deeper in, older stones lined up unevenly. I didn't know what I was looking for until I stopped in front of a headstone with a photo set into it. The picture was worn but clear enough. A man, younger than I'd expected. Same face. Same sharp features. Same eyes. My stomach dropped again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was something heavier. He had died in 1998. The dates were carved clean and simple. I stood there for a long time, letting the logic catch up to the fear. Bakersfield isn't small. Faces repeat. Sons look like fathers. Brothers look like brothers. People dress the same, move the same, smile the same. The man I saw could have been related. He could have been anyone passing through. Someone using the cemetery for the same shortcut I used. Someone who enjoyed standing still in the dark and watching strangers get uncomfortable. The ground tricked my eyes. My nerves filled in the rest. The scare didn't come from something unreal. It came from timing, darkness, and my own expectations. I realized how easily the brain turns gaps into threats. How fast a normal person can become something else when seen at the wrong moment. I left the cemetery knowing one thing clearly. Nothing followed me that night. No presence lingered. No mystery stayed unsolved. I had crossed paths with a living man who looked like someone buried there, and my fear had done the rest. The memory still makes my heart race when I think about it, not because of what it was, but because of how real it felt in the moment, and how close I came to letting my mind convince me of something that wasn't true. I went to Oak Hill Cemetery in Evansville on a Sunday afternoon that felt heavy in a quiet way. The sky was gray but not stormy, just thick with clouds that pressed down on everything. The air smelled like wet leaves and old stone. It was 3:15 p.m. when I parked my car along the narrow road that cut through the cemetery. I remember the time because I checked my phone before I got out, more out of habit than anything else. Sundays always made me think about time, about how fast weeks moved and how slow grief didn't. I was there to visit my uncle's grave. He had been sick for a long time, and even though he was still alive that morning, things were not looking good. My aunt had asked me to stop by the cemetery earlier in the week to make sure everything was in order. My uncle had already bought his plot years ago, next to an oak tree near the middle of the grounds. He liked that tree. He said it made the place feel less like an ending and more like a pause. I had visited that spot many times before, so I didn't need directions. The cemetery was quiet but not empty. A few people were spread out, walking slowly, standing still, or kneeling by stones. No one was close enough to hear anything from anyone else. The sound of my footsteps on the gravel path felt too loud in my ears. I walked past rows of headstones that leaned slightly with age, some clean and sharp, others worn smooth by time and weather. The oak tree was easy to spot. Its branches were bare, stretching out like long arms against the sky. As I stood near my uncle's plot, I noticed an old woman walking toward me from the left. She moved carefully, like each step had to be planned. She wore a dark coat that looked too thin for the weather and held a folded paper in her hand. Her hair was white and pulled back tight. She looked lost, not in a dramatic way, just unsure, like someone who had taken a wrong turn and was trying to fix it quietly. She stopped a few feet away from me and held up the paper, pointing at it and then at the rows of stones. Her face showed confusion and something close to worry. I understood she needed help finding a grave. I nodded and took a step toward her. She showed me the paper. On it was a name written in neat, careful letters. I recognized the last name right away, because it was my own. The first name matched my aunt's. I felt a small jolt of surprise, but didn't think much of it at first. Families share names. Cemeteries are full of repeats. I looked around, thinking of the stones nearby. The oak tree came to mind immediately. I walked a short distance and stopped at a headstone that stood near the base of the tree. It was clean and new compared to the others. The name carved into it matched the paper exactly. Same full name. Same last name. Same birth year. My stomach tightened when I noticed the death date. It was set for the next day. I looked closer, thinking I had read it wrong. I traced the numbers with my eyes again. The date was clear. Tomorrow. I felt cold even though I was wearing a jacket. The stone also listed my uncle's name below it, marked as beloved husband. That didn't make sense. My uncle was still alive when I left home. He was sick but alive. I turned back toward the old woman to show her what I had found. She was no longer there. I looked around, expecting to see her a few steps away, maybe having moved closer or wandered off. The area was open, with nothing tall enough to block a person from view. I scanned the paths, the rows of stones, the nearby benches. She was gone. No sound of footsteps, no movement in the distance that looked like her shape. I stood there longer than I meant to, feeling foolish for being shaken. People move fast sometimes. Old people can surprise you. I told myself that was all it was. Still, my hands were shaking when I pulled my phone out to check the time again. It was 3:18 p.m. I felt a strong urge to leave. The cemetery suddenly felt wrong, like I was standing somewhere I wasn't supposed to be yet. I walked back to my car quickly, not running, but not slow either. As I drove out, I passed a few people walking in, but none of them matched the old woman. I tried to push the whole thing out of my mind on the drive home. I told myself the stone must have been placed early by mistake. Dates get mixed up. Names get reused. Stress makes people see patterns that aren't there. That evening felt longer than usual. The sky stayed gray even as the light faded. I kept thinking about the carved letters, about how solid and final they looked. I thought about the old woman's face, how certain she seemed even without words. I didn't tell anyone about it. I didn't want to sound dramatic or upset anyone. That night my phone rang. It was my aunt. I could tell from her voice that something had happened. She told me my uncle had passed away that afternoon at the hospital. The time she gave was 3:20 p.m. I sat down slowly, my legs weak. I didn't interrupt her. I didn't tell her where I had been or what I had seen. I just listened as she explained, her words uneven and heavy. After the call ended, I sat in the dark for a long time. The house was quiet. I thought about the headstone again. I thought about the date carved into it, how it was set for the next day, not that day. I realized then that the stone wasn't wrong. It was set for the burial date, not the death. It had been planned ahead of time, prepared while my uncle was still alive, because everyone knew it was coming. The name on the stone was my aunt's, because she would be the one left. The old woman I had helped had been looking for herself, not knowing it yet, or maybe knowing in a way she couldn't explain. I understood then that nothing supernatural had happened. No ghost, no sign from beyond. Just timing, coincidence, and a moment where grief brushed up against reality before anyone was ready to name it. The old woman could have been another visitor, someone else with the same name, someone confused, someone I simply lost track of. What stayed with me was the feeling of standing in the space between before and after, seeing something meant for the near future before it officially arrived. The next day, when the date on the stone became true, everything felt settled in a way I didn't expect. Clear, but heavy. I went back to the cemetery later that week with my family. The oak tree stood the same as always. The stone looked normal then, like all the others. No wrong names. No wrong dates. Just a place where something had ended and something else had begun, quietly, without warning, and without needing anything unreal to make it frightening. I worked overnight security at Calvary Cemetery in Queens during the summer of 2021, when the city felt half asleep and half sick. It was a job I took because it paid better than most night work, and because I told myself nothing really happened in cemeteries. They were quiet places, organized, predictable. Rows of stone, trimmed grass, locked gates. The dead stayed where they were put. The living stayed out after dark. That was the idea, at least. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I wore a light vest, carried a radio, and spent most of the night sitting in a small security office near the main entrance. The room smelled like old coffee and disinfectant. The cameras were mounted on a wall of monitors, each showing a different section of the grounds. Most nights I watched raccoons dig through trash cans or saw headlights from the road outside the fence. Sometimes a stray cat passed between headstones. Nothing worth writing up. The cemetery was massive, more like a city than a yard. Narrow roads curved through it. Some sections were modern and clean. Others were older, with cracked paths and tilted stones from the 1800s. The north corner was the oldest part. Fewer lights, thicker trees, and a section of fencing that had been patched too many times. The cameras didn't reach that far. It was listed on the site map as under renovation, though I never saw any work done there. On the monitor wall, that area was just a blank space with a small note taped underneath that said North Corner Dead Zone. The first night the motion sensor tripped there, I assumed it was a glitch. The system logged the time automatically. 2:06 a.m. I wrote it down, reset the alert, and went back to my phone. The second night it happened again at the exact same minute. The third night too. Same place, same time. No camera footage. No sound. Just a clean alert and a blank screen. By the end of the first week, I had a notebook filled with identical entries. Date, time, location. 2:06 a.m., North Corner. It didn't matter if it rained or stayed dry, if it was hot or cooler, if I was tired or wide awake. The alert came like clockwork. I started waiting for it, watching the seconds tick on my phone. When it hit, my stomach always tightened a little, like I had missed a step on the stairs. The air in the cemetery changed at night in ways that were hard to explain. During the day, the place felt open and neutral. At night, it felt closed in. Sound didn't travel right. The trees blocked the wind, and the smell of wet dirt and cut grass sat heavy. Around 2 a.m., everything went still. Even the insects seemed to stop. That was usually when the pressure started in my ears, like being underwater or driving down a steep hill too fast. I checked the sensor logs and maintenance reports. The sensor had been replaced earlier that year. No issues listed. No false alarms reported by the previous guard, though his notes were sparse. Just times, patrols, nothing else. I told myself it was probably animals triggering it, maybe something burrowing underground. Still, animals didn't follow schedules. On the 12th night, I decided I would walk out there. I didn't tell anyone because there was no one to tell at that hour, and I didn't want it written off as me being nervous. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out through the side door a few minutes before 2 a.m. The heat was thick, even that late. My shirt stuck to my back. The path toward the north corner was uneven, the gravel crunching too loud under my boots. As I got closer, the pressure in my ears grew stronger. My flashlight beam felt weak, like it was being swallowed by the dark instead of cutting through it. The trees were denser there, branches crossing overhead. The air smelled wrong, sour and metallic, not like dirt or grass. I slowed down without meaning to, my body reacting before my brain caught up. At 2:06 a.m., my radio crackled with static on my hip. Not voices, just noise, sharp and sudden. I stopped walking. The motion sensor alert hit at the same moment, a vibration against my chest. I swept the flashlight across the ground, expecting to see an animal, or maybe a broken fence. What I saw instead made my legs feel weak. The ground around me was soft, darker than the rest of the path. Muddy footprints pressed deep into the soil. Bare feet, adult-sized, dozens of them. They formed a loose circle around where I stood, all facing inward. The toes were clear, the heels heavy. There were no shoe prints mixed in. No drag marks. No prints leading away toward the path or the trees. It looked like they had appeared there and stopped. I turned slowly, scanning the area. The whispering started then. It wasn't voices saying words. It was more like the sound of many people breathing quietly at once, just out of reach. It came from everywhere and nowhere. My skin prickled and my mouth went dry. I realized I had stepped into the exact center of the dead zone. I backed up carefully, watching the ground so I wouldn't slip. The footprints stayed where they were. The air pressure eased slightly as I moved away. When I reached the path, the sounds faded, replaced by the normal quiet of the cemetery. I didn't run, but I didn't look back either. I returned to the office and locked the door behind me. I didn't sleep the next day. I kept thinking about the details that didn't fit. The timing. The lack of tracks leading in or out. The bare feet. Over the next few nights, I paid closer attention to the rest of the grounds. I noticed fresh tire marks near a service gate that wasn't supposed to be used after hours. I found a section of fence pushed down and pulled back up, the ground packed hard from repeated use. I smelled that same sour metallic odor near the north corner during daylight, stronger now that I knew to look for it. I requested maintenance logs and delivery schedules. There were gaps, nights when vehicles were signed in without details, names missing, times rounded. I checked the soil reports posted online for the cemetery and nearby construction sites. The north corner had been flagged years earlier for drainage issues. Soft ground, easy to dig, easy to disturb without leaving lasting marks. By the end of the month, the motion sensor stopped going off. No alert at 2:06 a.m. The dead zone stayed dead. A week later, a temporary fence went up around the north corner with signs about upcoming work. Trucks arrived during the day. Fresh gravel covered the paths. New lights were installed, bright and harsh. I turned in my badge the next morning. I didn't write anything extra in the log. There was no place for it. I knew why the alerts had been happening, and I knew why they stopped. Some things aren't meant to be witnessed, just noticed enough to know when to leave. I walked out of the cemetery for the last time as the sun came up, the heat already building, and I didn't look back. I remember that day because everything felt slowed down by the cold. February in northern Minnesota does that. The air is so sharp it feels like it scrapes the inside of your nose. The sky was a dull white, not snowing but heavy with it, like it could start at any moment. The cemetery sat a few miles outside Duluth, away from the lake, tucked into a stretch of trees and low hills. It was quiet in a way that felt heavy, like sound itself had frozen. I had driven there alone, my tires crunching over packed snow and ice. The parking area was half plowed, snowbanks pushed up against the fence. When I stepped out of the car, the cold went straight through my boots. The kind of cold where your feet start to ache before you even start walking. I pulled my coat tighter and followed the path toward the small group already gathered. The funeral itself was short. Everyone stood close together, shoulders hunched, breath puffing out in white clouds. The priest spoke quickly, probably to spare us all from standing there too long. The casket was already lowered. I remember thinking how hard the ground must have been, how much work it would take to dig even a shallow hole in that frozen soil. When it ended, people didn't linger. They hugged briefly, nodded to each other, and walked back toward their cars without much talking. Grief and cold have a way of doing that. I stayed behind longer than I meant to. Part of it was respect. Part of it was that I didn't want to get back into my freezing car just yet. I walked slowly along the rows of headstones, reading names and dates, most of them half buried in snow. Everything was covered in an even white layer, smooth except where footprints had cut through it. That's when I noticed the spot near the tree line. It stood out because it didn't fit. Every grave around it was blanketed in snow, even the newer ones with fresh mounds. This one wasn't. The ground there was dark and exposed, the soil uneven, like it had been turned recently. The contrast was sharp, almost wrong, like a missing tooth in a smile. At first, I thought maybe someone had cleared it off. Maybe family had come earlier and brushed the snow away. But there were no footprints leading to it. The snow around it was untouched, smooth and clean. The bare patch sat there alone, about 6 feet long, roughly shaped, the edges messy. I felt a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. Curiosity pulled me closer, even as something else told me to leave it alone. My boots sank into the snow as I walked toward it, each step loud in the silence. The trees nearby creaked softly, branches shifting in the wind. When I stood over the grave, I could see the soil clearly. It was dark brown, almost black, clumped together. It looked damp, which made no sense in that cold. Everything else was frozen solid. I crouched down, my knees protesting, and reached out without really thinking about it. I was wearing thick gloves, the kind meant for shoveling snow. I pressed my hand flat against the dirt. The warmth was immediate and undeniable. It wasn't just not cold. It was warm, like the ground in late summer after the sun has been on it all day. Heat pushed back through the glove, enough that I could feel it clearly. My body reacted before my mind did. I yanked my hand back and stood up too fast, nearly losing my balance. My heart started pounding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. I stared down at the grave, trying to make sense of what I had just felt. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Decomposition creates heat. That was something I had heard before. But this was Minnesota in February. The ground around it was frozen stiff. And this grave wasn't marked. No stone. No flowers. Nothing. That was when I heard it. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the wind moving through the trees. A soft sound, barely there. I held my breath without meaning to. The sound came again, clearer this time. Slow. Shallow. Like someone trying not to breathe too loudly. It was coming from below. My skin prickled all over. Every hair on my arm stood up under my coat. I leaned slightly closer, my head tilted, my ears straining. The sound wasn't steady. There were pauses between each breath, uneven gaps that made my stomach twist. It sounded weak. Strained. I told myself it had to be an animal. A burrowing animal trapped underground. That made sense. It had to be that. But even as I thought it, I knew it didn't fit. Animals don't make holes shaped like graves. Animals don't warm the soil evenly across a long rectangle. I stepped back, then another step, my boots slipping a little on the packed snow. The breathing didn't stop. If anything, it seemed closer, louder, like the sound was traveling up through the dirt toward me. I felt sick. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, slow to respond. I looked around the cemetery, half expecting to see someone watching me, someone who could explain this. There was no one. The parking lot was empty now. The road beyond the fence was quiet. No cars. No movement. I backed away until my calves hit a headstone, and I nearly fell. That snapped me out of it. I turned and walked fast toward my car, not daring to run, afraid of slipping, afraid of something else I couldn't name. I didn't look back. I kept my eyes on the path, on my feet, on anything but the trees and the graves around me. When I reached my car, my hands were shaking so badly I fumbled with the keys. I got inside and slammed the door, locking it even though I knew how pointless that was. I sat there for a moment, breathing hard, watching the cemetery through the windshield. Everything looked normal. Still. Silent. I drove away with my shoulders tight, checking the rearview mirror more than I needed to. The road stretched out empty behind me. I didn't tell anyone about what I had seen or heard. I tried to forget it. I went back to work, went through my days, but the memory stayed sharp. At night, I would think about that sound, about how weak it had been, how it had come from below the frozen ground. A week later, I couldn't stand it anymore. I needed to know if there had been a burial there, if there was some official reason for that grave. I checked the local obituaries online, scrolling back through the days before and after the funeral. I looked up burial permits, public records that listed plots and dates. There was nothing. No one buried in that section. No recent permits at all. I even called the cemetery office. I didn't tell them everything. I just asked if there had been any recent burials near the tree line. The woman on the phone told me no, her voice flat and certain. She said the ground was too frozen for new graves that week. That answer didn't help. It made things worse. A few days after that, I drove back out there. I told myself I just wanted closure. The cemetery looked the same as before, quiet and white. I walked straight to the spot, my heart racing with each step. The grave was still there. Still bare. Still dark. No snow had settled on it, even though fresh snow covered everything else. I didn't kneel this time. I didn't touch it. I just stood there, staring, listening. I didn't hear breathing anymore. What I noticed instead were the marks. The soil at one end of the grave was disturbed in a different way now. Scratches. Grooves. Like something had pressed up from underneath, pushing against the dirt, trying to move it. The edges of the grave looked slightly collapsed, as if the ground had shifted. I left again, faster this time. I haven't gone back since. That spot is still there. I've driven past the cemetery more than once, slowing down without meaning to. From the road, I can still see that patch near the trees, darker than the rest, refusing to be covered. There is still no marker. Still no record. And every time I think about it, what stays with me the most is not the warmth or the sound. It's the thought that whatever was under that ground did not get out, and that the earth itself seemed to know it was still there. I went to Laurel Grove Cemetery late, because the light was good. Savannah gets this low, slanted sun in the afternoon that makes everything look softer than it really is. The marble doesn't glare as much. The old trees throw long shadows that line up perfectly with the paths. I had been there before and knew the place well enough to feel comfortable wandering alone with my camera. I parked on the street, checked the sign by the gate, and saw the closing time without really taking it in. 6 o'clock felt far away. I told myself I would keep an eye on my phone. I moved slowly, stopping every few steps. The cemetery is big, and it doesn't feel planned in a neat way. The paths curve instead of running straight. Some sections are tight, with stones close together, and other areas open up into wide grassy stretches. The air smelled like warm dirt and old leaves. Cicadas buzzed so loud it felt like static in my ears. Every time I bent down to adjust my lens, I could feel the humidity settle on my neck and arms. I focused on details. A chipped angel wing. A name worn almost smooth. A stone that had tilted so much it looked like it might fall if someone leaned on it. I took my time lining up shots, waiting for the light to hit just right. I lost track of time the way I always do when I'm shooting. The world narrows to a rectangle, and everything else fades out. When I finally checked my phone again, it was 6:12. The screen felt too bright in the dimming light. I stood still for a moment, listening. The cicadas were quieter now. Birds were settling down. Somewhere far off, I could hear traffic. I told myself it was fine. Cemeteries don't lock people in. I just needed to head back to the main gate. I started walking faster, cutting across a section I hadn't been through yet. The ground was uneven, and my shoes brushed against tall grass. I kept glancing up, trying to spot the iron fence through the trees. That was when I heard the bell. It wasn't loud or sharp. It was slow and steady, like a hand bell rung at an even pace. The sound didn't echo. It didn't carry. It just sat in the air behind me. At first I thought it might be coming from the street. Then I realized it was too close for that. I stopped walking. The bell kept ringing at the same rhythm. I felt a tightness in my chest, the kind that comes when your body reacts before your brain catches up. I turned my head slightly, trying to place the sound without fully turning around. It felt like it was following me, matching my steps from a few seconds ago. I started moving again, slower this time. I told myself there was a normal explanation. A maintenance shed. A warning bell for equipment. A nearby church testing something early. Savannah is full of old systems that still run on simple mechanisms. A man passed me on the path going the other direction. He wore work clothes, dirt on the knees, gloves tucked into his back pocket. He was pushing a wheelbarrow. It was empty, the metal tray rattling softly over the uneven ground. He didn't look at me. He didn't slow down. He just kept walking, head down, like he had a place to be before dark. Seeing him helped, but only a little. The bell kept ringing. As I walked deeper into the cemetery instead of out, I noticed changes that hadn't been there minutes before. Fresh flowers sat at the base of stones I was sure had been bare. The petals were still firm, not wilted. The soil around several headstones was dark and turned, like it had been dug and filled again recently. The smell of earth was stronger here, damp and heavy. I stopped in front of one stone to get my bearings. The name was unfamiliar. The date carved below it was today's date. I stepped back and looked around. Every stone in that small section had the same thing. Flowers that looked newly placed. Soil that hadn't settled yet. The same date cut clean into the stone, the grooves still sharp, not worn down by weather. The bell rang again, closer than before. Not behind me this time. Right next to my ear. The sound was so sudden and near that I flinched and nearly dropped my camera. My skin prickled, and my stomach twisted hard enough to make me feel sick. I spun around, heart pounding, breath coming too fast. There was nothing there. No person. No pole. No visible source for the sound. I didn't stay to think it through. I turned and ran. I didn't follow the paths. I cut straight across the grass, stumbling once and catching myself with my hands. My camera knocked against my chest with every step. My lungs burned. I could hear my own breathing louder than anything else now. The bell didn't follow me, or maybe it did, and I couldn't hear it over the rush in my ears. The trees thinned as I got closer to the edge. I saw the iron gate ahead, dark against the lighter sky. It was open, wide open. I ran through it and didn't slow down until I reached the sidewalk on the other side. I bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath, sweat dripping off my face. The street looked normal. Cars passed. Someone walked a dog. The sky was turning orange and pink like it always does at sunset. Nothing about the world outside the gate felt off. I went home and didn't look at the photos that night. Over the next few days, I tried to make sense of what happened without turning it into something it wasn't. I went back through the images on my camera in daylight, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. The photos were normal. Stones, trees, light and shadow. In one shot, taken not long before I checked the time, there were no flowers in the background. In another, taken minutes later, they were there. The timestamps matched what I remembered. I searched public records and found that a large burial service had been scheduled for that day, with multiple plots prepared in advance. Temporary markers had been set out, pre-carved with the date, waiting for names to be added later. The flowers had been delivered late, placed quickly as the light faded. The soil was fresh because the work had finished close to closing time. I learned that the cemetery used a simple bell system connected to a timer. It was meant to signal workers at the far end of the grounds when it was time to wrap up and head out. The bell was mounted on a small post near one of the paths, low enough that someone walking past it at the wrong angle could hear it suddenly, right at ear level. I also learned that one of the side gates stayed unlocked until nightfall, in case someone was still inside after hours. It was standard practice. It had been open the whole time. All of it made sense when laid out in plain facts. None of it felt strange on its own. Even knowing that, I don't go back. The memory of that sound, steady and close, and the sight of those stones all sharing the same date, is enough to keep me away. The fear didn't come from anything unreal. It came from being alone, late, and surrounded by signs of how easily time can slip past without you noticing. I grew up knowing my grandfather as a quiet man who smelled like cut grass and motor oil. He worked nights at Bell Fountain Cemetery in St. Louis through most of the 1980s. When I was a kid, I thought that meant he watched over the dead. Later I learned it mostly meant fixing locks, chasing off teenagers, filling out paperwork, and walking long paths under old trees while the city slept. He never told stories about his job. He never joked about it. It was just work to him. And when he came home in the morning, he washed his hands for a long time and went to bed. After he died, my mother gave me a box from his basement. Inside were receipts, old gloves, a flashlight that barely worked, and a small black notebook. The cover was cracked from years of being bent in a back pocket. The pages smelled like dirt and damp paper. On the first page he had written his name and the address of the cemetery. Nothing else. The log was exactly what you would expect from a man like him. Short entries. Dates. Times. Weather. Broken fence near the north wall. Fresh tire tracks by the mausoleum. Spray paint on a headstone. Notes about tools that needed replacing. A lot of it was dull, almost comforting in how routine it was. It showed me who he was better than any story could. Careful. Observant. Not dramatic. Then I noticed a pattern. About once a month there was an entry at exactly 4 a.m. Not around that time. Not between patrols. Exactly 4 o'clock. The handwriting was always tighter, more careful, like he slowed down when he wrote it. The wording never changed. He wrote that he spoke with the visitors and told them to stay put. No names. No location in the cemetery. No description of who they were or why they were there. Just that line. Over and over again, spread across years. Sometimes there were notes before and after about fixing a light or hearing dogs barking in the distance, but that line always stood alone. I tried to explain it away. Bell Fountain is huge. People sneak in. Homeless people sleep there. Teenagers drink there. Maybe he ran into the same group every month and learned to handle it quietly. Maybe it was just a habit in how he wrote things down. But the timing bothered me. So did the word visitors. Not trespassers. Not people. Visitors. The final entry was dated 2 days before he died. That part one already knew. He had a heart attack at home. Sudden. No warning. The notebook should have ended there. But it didn't. That last page was missing. I didn't realize that until a year later, when I found it in my mailbox. It was folded once lengthwise, like someone wanted to make sure it fit without creasing it too much. My address was written on the outside in block letters, no stamp, no envelope. Just the page. The paper was yellowed and soft at the edges. I recognized the handwriting immediately. The entry was dated the same as the others. 4 a.m. The words were different this time. He wrote that they were asking for me now. I stood in my driveway for a long time holding that paper. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Nothing else was out of place. No one watching from a car. No footsteps behind me. Still, my hands shook. I started thinking about things I had ignored growing up. How my grandfather insisted on driving me to school even when it made him late for work. How he never let me walk home alone, even in daylight. How he once changed all the locks on his house after a normal night shift and never explained why. At the time it felt like overprotective behavior from an old man. Now it felt like preparation. I went back to the cemetery during the day. I walked the paths he would have walked. I stood near the mausoleums and watched people come and go. I noticed things I never had before. How some areas were hidden from the road. How easy it would be to move something heavy without being seen. How the place stayed open late enough that a car could come in and out without raising alarms. I did research on the 1980s in that part of the city. About organized dumping. About stolen goods being stored temporarily in places no one watched closely. About quiet meetings that needed neutral ground. Cemeteries were mentioned more than once, usually buried in articles about something else. It made sense in a way that felt worse than anything supernatural ever could. My grandfather wasn't talking to the dead. He was managing living people who wanted to stay unnoticed. People who came back every month because the place worked for them. People who learned his schedule and trusted his silence. He told them to stay put. Not to leave. Not to move. That meant he was controlling something. Timing. Location. Maybe he was keeping them away from certain areas. Maybe he was keeping them away from me. When he died, whatever balance he had kept was gone. The page in my mailbox was proof that someone had kept the log. That someone had followed the pattern long enough to know when it broke. That someone knew who I was and where I lived. I moved out of that house within a week. I didn't tell my neighbors why. I didn't post about it. I changed my routines. I stopped walking the same routes. I paid attention to cars parked too long on my street. I reported the page to the police, but without context it was just a strange note from a dead man. Sometimes early in the morning, I wake up before my alarm. I look at the clock and see 3:58 or 3:59. I think about my grandfather standing under old trees with a flashlight and a notebook, doing a job that asked him to see everything and say almost nothing. I think about the fact that he lasted years doing that, and that the last thing he did was try to pass the weight of it on to me, without a voice. The ending is clear to me now. He wasn't warning me about visitors. He was telling me that the role had been reassigned. Whoever those people were, they believed the position still existed. And the fact that the page reached my mailbox means they are patient, organized, and close enough to know when to remind me that they are still waiting. I went out that night because I could not sleep. August in Chicago has a way of sitting on your chest, even after midnight. The air feels thick and warm, like it does not want to move. I had been doing night walks for months, filming quiet places and posting short clips online. No talking, no music, just streets, trees, and whatever sound happened to be there. It helped me calm down. It made the nights feel less empty. Rose Hill Cemetery was close to my apartment, and it was big enough that you could walk for a long time without seeing anyone. I arrived around 1:30 a.m. The gates were open. They usually were. The place was lit just enough to see the paths and the shapes of headstones. Yellow streetlights along the road cast long shadows that bent and stretched as I walked past. Crickets were loud. There was distant traffic noise, but it was low and steady, like a faraway river. I held my phone out in front of me and hit record. I checked that airplane mode was on. I always did that so notifications would not ruin the audio. The screen showed the time, the battery, and the red dot telling me it was recording. I put the phone down by my side and walked slowly, letting it capture whatever it could. My shoes made a soft sound on the gravel path. I passed old family plots, some with iron fences around them, some with statues worn down by weather and time. Names and dates were carved deep into stone. Many of them were from the late 1800s and early 1900s. I remember thinking about how many people were buried there, stacked quietly under the ground, while the city kept moving around them. I did not feel scared. I felt focused, calm even. I walked for about 20 minutes, turning when the path curved, stopping once to steady the phone because my hand cramped. I did not speak. I did not cough. I did not even clear my throat. I was careful about that because I wanted clean sound. When I finished, I stopped near a large tree and ended the recording. I checked the clip length. Just over 22 minutes. I put the phone in my pocket and walked home. My apartment was quiet. I locked the door behind me, washed my hands, and went to bed. I did not watch the video until 2 days later. I usually waited. When I finally sat down with headphones on, it was early evening. Sunlight came in through the blinds. My place felt normal. Safe. I pressed play and let the video run. Most of it was exactly what I expected. Footsteps. Wind-moving leaves. Insects. A car passing far away. Around 12 minutes in, I leaned closer to the screen because I thought I heard something off, like a change in the background sound. I rewound a few seconds and listened again. It was faint. Almost nothing. I kept watching. At 12 minutes and 44 seconds, something clear cut through the noise. It was quiet, but it was not random. It sounded like my name. Not shouted. Not loud. Just said close, like someone leaning in. My stomach dropped before my brain caught up. I paused the video. I sat still and listened to the silence in my apartment. I told myself it was nothing. Audio does weird things. The brain fills gaps. I had heard that before. I unpaused and let it play. A few seconds later, there was another sound. Longer this time. It sounded like a sentence. It sounded like someone stating a fact. The words were clear enough that I could repeat them after. The meaning hit me harder than the sound itself. It suggested that I was standing on someone. I took the headphones off. My hands were shaking. I replayed that section again, out loud this time, then with headphones again. Each time it sounded the same. Not louder. Not clearer. Just the same. I checked the audio waveform. The spikes were there. I checked the metadata. The timestamp was normal. The file had not been edited. The GPS data was embedded, like it always was. I had location services on for the camera app because I liked knowing where I filmed. I opened the map linked to the timestamp. It dropped a pin exactly where I had been standing at that moment. I zoomed in. The satellite view showed rows of graves. I switched to the cemetery map, which listed plots by name. It took me a minute to find the right section. The name on the grave under that pin matched mine. First and last. I stared at it until my eyes hurt. I clicked for more details. Same birthday. Month, day, year. The death year field was blank. I laughed once, short and sharp, because it felt unreal. I told myself names repeat. Birthdays repeat. Databases have errors. Someone messed up a record. Or the GPS drifted a few feet. That happens all the time. Still, I closed the app. I closed everything. I deleted the video from my phone. I emptied the trash. I backed up nothing. I did not post it. I did not tell anyone. Over the next few days, small things started to feel off. My phone began to suggest Rose Hill Cemetery as a frequent location. That was not strange by itself, except the label it used. It showed up as home. Not my address. Not a pin I had saved. Just home. I tried to fix it. I edited locations. I turned history off. I cleared cache. The suggestion went away for a bit, then came back. Sometimes when I opened a map app, the blue dot would snap there for a second before correcting itself to my apartment. I checked public records online. There was a person buried at Rose Hill with my exact name and birthday. The page looked old, like it had been scanned and converted to text. The death year was still blank. No other information. No photo. No relatives listed. I started paying attention to my phone more than I ever had. Battery drain. Background activity. Microphone access. Nothing stood out. I ran virus scans. I reset the phone. I restored it as new. The home suggestion returned within a week. I went back to the cemetery once, in daylight. I told myself I needed to see it clearly. The grave was real. The stone was worn but legible. Same name. Same date. The space where the death year should be looked newer than the rest, like it had been polished recently, or maybe never carved. I did not film. I did not stay long. I felt exposed, standing there in the sun with people walking dogs nearby, like I was doing something wrong just by being present. After that, I stopped night walks. I stopped recording. I started leaving my phone in another room when I slept. Life went on in a normal way. Work, groceries, sleep. But there was a thin layer of unease under everything, like a low hum you only notice when the room gets quiet. I never heard the voice again. Nothing else like it showed up in any recording. No calls. No messages. Just the location suggestion that would not fully go away. I eventually came to an explanation that I could live with. Somewhere in a system I do not control, data got crossed. A name. A birthday. A location. An algorithm decided something and kept deciding it, even when I told it not to. The sound in the video was a mix of wind, insects, and my own expectations, shaped into meaning by a tired brain. The fear filled in the rest. I accepted that explanation because I had to. Telling myself anything else would have broken something in me. I moved apartments the next year. Different neighborhood. Different routines. The phone still sometimes suggests that cemetery, but now it does not call it home. It just sits there in my history like a place I passed through once. I know where I live. I know where my body is. I eat, I sleep, I go to work. Nothing else has followed me. But I do not film at night anymore, and I do not listen too closely when a recording gets quiet. I learned that some details are better left unexamined, not because they are unreal, but because they are too easy to fit into your life once you notice them. I jog past Pine Ridge Cemetery every morning. It sits on the edge of a quiet road in Oregon, right where the trees get thick and the houses thin out. I have run this route for years. I wake up at 4:45 a.m., drink a glass of water, stretch in my living room, and step outside by 5:05. I start my watch the second my shoes hit the pavement. By the time I reach the cemetery gate, it is always 5:10. I know this because I check it every single time without thinking, the same way people check mirrors when they drive. The air that morning felt heavier than usual. It had rained the night before, and the ground still smelled damp, like wet dirt and leaves. The sky was dark but not fully night, that flat gray-blue color right before sunrise. My breath came out steady, small clouds that faded fast. Everything felt normal at first. My legs moved easy. My pace was calm. I could hear the soft thud of my shoes and the faint hum of a distant highway. As I got closer to the cemetery, the fog started to roll in. At first it was thin, just low streaks that hugged the ground. Then it thickened fast. Within seconds, the road ahead blurred, and the trees on the other side of the fence faded into pale shapes. The iron gate of the cemetery appeared out of the fog like it always does, tall and black, with the sign hanging crooked on the right side. I passed through that stretch every morning and never slowed down. The fog wrapped around me like a blanket. It felt colder inside it, and the sound of the road changed. My footsteps sounded duller, like they were landing on soft ground, even though I was still on asphalt. That was when I noticed another sound. Breathing. At first I thought it was my own. When you jog long enough, you know your breathing pattern well. This was not it. It was slightly off, just a fraction behind my inhale and exhale. Close enough to feel personal, close enough that it made the hair on my arms lift. I kept my eyes forward, trying to see shapes in the fog. I could not see anyone. The fence to my right ran alongside me, the metal bars disappearing into white. To my left was the road, empty and silent. The breathing stayed right there, level with me. Footsteps joined it. The steps landed when mine did, not ahead, not behind. Exactly with me. I told myself it was another jogger. Plenty of people run early. Still, something felt wrong. In all the years I had run this route, I had never seen anyone else pass the cemetery at this hour. I sped up without thinking. My stride lengthened, and my breathing grew sharper. The steps beside me did the same. The breathing stayed matched to mine, as if we were connected by a string. My chest tightened. I glanced down at my watch to check my pace. The screen showed 5:10. I frowned and kept running. A few seconds passed. I looked again. Still 5:10. My watch never froze. It was not old. I had charged it the night before. I tapped the screen with my thumb. Nothing changed. The seconds were not moving. My heart started to race harder, and not from the run. The fog seemed thicker now, pressing in from all sides. I could no longer see the end of the fence. I focused on the road ahead, waiting for the crossing up ahead, the place where the sidewalk breaks and the road opens wide. I always slowed there, just for a moment, out of habit. As that thought crossed my mind, I heard the breathing shift closer, almost brushing my shoulder. Then I heard words, low and close, shaped clearly enough that I understood them without turning my head. The words matched something I had done hundreds of times without realizing it. My body reacted before my mind did. I surged forward, pushing harder than I ever had on this route. My legs burned. My lungs felt raw. The steps beside me stayed. The breathing stayed. I did not look over. I could not make myself do it. I stared straight ahead until the fog began to thin. When I crossed the street, everything changed at once. The fog broke apart like smoke and wind. The morning light came back, soft and gray. The road was empty. The sound of breathing was gone. The extra footsteps were gone. Only my own remained, loud and uneven. I slowed to a walk, hands on my knees, gasping. My watch buzzed. I looked down. The time was moving again. 5:11, then 5:12. I stood there until my breathing settled. My legs shook, partly from the sprint, partly from something else I did not want to name. I turned around. The cemetery gate stood behind me, solid and clear in the morning light. The fog was gone from that stretch of road, like it had never been there. I walked back a few steps, my shoes scraping on the pavement. The sign on the gate caught my eye. I had looked at it countless times before without really reading it. Closing time 5:10 a.m. I stared at the sign for a long time. My mind tried to fill in gaps, to make the morning fit into something normal. Fog can mess with sound. Exhaustion can play tricks on your head. Watches can glitch. I told myself all of that as I walked home. Still, my pace slowed as I passed the gate, and I did not run again that morning. Later that day, I looked up the cemetery online. The hours matched the sign. It closed at 5:10 a.m. every day. Maintenance staff did a perimeter walk before sunrise to make sure no one was inside before the gates locked fully. Runners, cyclists, dog walkers, people just like me had been asked to leave before without ever realizing why the time mattered. That night, I charged my watch again. It showed no errors. The battery was fine. The data from the run showed a sudden spike in pace right at 5:10, then a stop, then a slow walk. No second runner. No strange gaps. The next morning, I woke up and stood in my kitchen, shoes in my hands. I checked the clock on the microwave. 5:03. I stepped outside later than usual. I started my run slower than usual. When I reached the cemetery road, the sky was lighter, the fog already gone. I passed the gate at 5:14. Nothing happened. I still run that route. I still pass Pine Ridge Cemetery. But I do not time it anymore. I do not check my watch at the gate. And when the air feels heavy and the fog starts to roll in, I turn around early. I know now that routines can hide things in plain sight, and that sometimes the line between normal and wrong is just a minute long. The day felt normal, in the boring way October days in the Texas Panhandle usually do. Dry wind, pale sky, the sun too bright for how cool the air was. My cousin had a side job taking photos of old headstones for an online archive. Families paid small fees to have records updated, and rural cemeteries were full of stones no one visited anymore. I went with him because I had nothing else to do, and because I liked being out where there were no buildings, no traffic, no noise besides wind and grass moving. The cemetery sat several miles outside Amarillo, down a gravel road that looked like it ended in nothing. No gate, just a cattle guard and a rusted sign with the cemetery name painted so thin you could barely read it. The place was small, maybe 100 graves, uneven rows, many markers leaning or half sunk. Some were proper granite stones, others were just metal funeral home markers, some were wooden crosses so faded they blended into the dirt. I remember noticing how the ground changed near the fence line. Most of the cemetery had short grass and packed soil. Near the fence, the earth looked disturbed in long, shallow lines, like someone had dragged something heavy there years ago and never fixed it. There was a strip of ground with nothing on it. No stone, no cross, no marker, just bare dirt and weeds. My cousin walked row by row, taking pictures, logging names. I followed behind, watching where I stepped. The ground was uneven, and I kept thinking about how many bodies were under my feet. Not in a dramatic way. Just the quiet fact of it. We didn't talk. The wind made talking annoying anyway. When my cousin reached the fence line, he took photos of the last visible markers. Then he stopped and frowned at his camera. He lifted it again and took another picture of the empty patch. I remember thinking it was pointless. There was nothing there. He took another photo, then another. I walked closer and looked at the camera screen. The image looked wrong. The ground near the fence was blurred in a way that didn't match the rest of the photo. Everything else was sharp. The fence posts were clear. The weeds were clear. Only that patch looked smeared, like the camera had moved, but my cousin's hands were steady. In the blur there was a shape. Vague, human-sized. Like someone standing still but caught mid-motion. I thought it was a shadow at first, but the sun angle didn't make sense. My cousin adjusted settings and took another picture. This time the shape was clearer. It looked like a person standing with their back to the fence. The colors matched my jacket. Same dull gray. Same dark jeans. I felt cold in a way that didn't match the weather. I knew exactly where I had been standing a few seconds earlier. Right there, near the fence, while I waited for him to finish a row. I had stepped away because I didn't want to be in the shot. He took another photo. The figure was sharper. I could see the shape of the shoulders. The stance. The way the weight was on one leg. It was the way I stand when I'm tired and trying not to show it. I moved farther away from the fence, slow, watching the ground. My boots left clear prints in the dirt. I knew where I was. I knew where I had been. The camera showed something that shouldn't have been there anymore. The last photo he took was clear. Too clear. There was no blur. The figure stood facing the camera now. It was me. Same jacket. Same jeans. Same boots. Same stupid cowlick in my hair I never managed to flatten. The expression on my face wasn't scared. It was confused. Brows pulled together slightly. Mouth open like I was about to say something, but didn't know what. Behind that version of me, stuck into the dirt near the fence, was a wooden marker. It wasn't a cross. It was a rough plank, like something cut from scrap wood. The letters were carved deep and uneven, like someone used a pocket knife and rushed. My full name was on it. First, middle, last. Spelled right. I stared at the camera screen until my eyes hurt. My brain kept trying to fix it by turning it into something else. A reflection. A double exposure. A glitch combined with an old photo. Anything except what it looked like. I checked the ground again. No marker. No plank. Just dirt and weeds and the fence. My cousin lowered the camera and looked confused. He took one more photo of the same spot. Nothing. Just empty ground. He didn't say anything. Neither did I. We finished the rest of the cemetery in silence. I kept my distance from the fence line. I kept checking my shadow, my reflection in the camera lens, my hands, like something might have changed without me noticing. When we left, the sun was lower. The shadows were long and thin. The gravel road looked exactly the same as when we arrived. Normal. Boring. I felt stupid for how tense my body was, like I had been bracing for something that never came. In the truck, I pulled out my phone. I wanted to see the photo again, just to confirm it was real. That I hadn't imagined it. The photo wasn't there. Not deleted. Not hidden. Just gone. The camera roll skipped from an earlier picture straight to one taken later, like the file had never existed. But something else was there. A saved location. Pinned. Labeled automatically. Burial site. I opened it. The map zoomed into the exact spot near the fence. The empty patch of ground. The coordinates were precise. Not a general area. Not the cemetery as a whole. That specific strip of dirt. I felt sick, not in a dramatic way, but the slow, heavy kind that settles in your stomach and stays there. That night I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wooden marker. The uneven letters. My name carved like someone had practiced it before. Over the next few days, I tried to explain it logically. Cameras glitch. Metadata gets corrupted. Location services mislabel things. Phones save places you don't remember. Brains fill in gaps when they're tired. I went back to the cemetery alone a week later. Same time of day. Same weather. I stood by the fence and looked at the ground. There was still nothing there. No marker. No disturbed soil. No sign anyone had ever been buried there. But when I checked my phone, the location pin was still saved. Burial site. It wouldn't let me rename it. Every time I tried, the app crashed. I started digging into public records online. Burial permits. Cemetery maps. Old scanned documents. It took hours. Then days. I found my name. Not as a living person. Not as an error. As a burial entry. The date was wrong. The year was wrong. But the name was mine. Full name. No birth date. No death date. Just a location reference that matched the fence line. The record had been created recently. Weeks ago. Filed under maintenance notes, not deaths. Like someone had marked a plot without completing the rest. I realized then that nothing had followed me home. Nothing was waiting for me. There was no ghost, no curse, no presence. Just a mistake. A human one. A system that didn't care if a name belonged to someone still walking around. The photo didn't predict my death. It recorded a moment when data, location, and identity overlapped in the wrong way. Someone somewhere had marked a spot for me by accident, or by carelessness, or because my name matched another file that shouldn't have been connected. The figure in the photo wasn't a warning. It was a reflection caught by timing, angle, and a camera trying to make sense of something it couldn't label correctly. The reason it scared me was simple. For a few seconds, the world had treated me like I was already gone, and no one noticed the difference.